where those workers take action. One of them I'm going to move to is Oxfam, to Ed, because Oxfam has been campaigning for years to end inequality. Um, but a lot of the feedback we get when we talk about peace or we talk about the need to end militarism, especially now when it's very popular among our governments to all invest in it, is to say, well, what room is there really to talk about, and finance poverty reduction or to reduce inequality when national budgets are increasingly structured to support militarization? We have to do it to keep us safe. So Ed, I wanted to pose that question to you and give you the floor, in this sort of, I think, false dichotomy that they've created. We either have to invest in our safety or we have to invest in poverty reduction. We have to invest in inequality. And the choice seems to be clear for governments, but we're quite confident as trade unionists from our own members that they feel differently. So what room is there? Let's answer the question. What room is there to finance these things in a time of rising militarism? Ed, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. And thanks, ITUC, for convening this, and really great to hear from you, Sean and Susie. I'm looking forward to hearing from Agnes and Agnes and Danielle also. It is clear that we're living in a time of profound contradiction. On the one hand, you've got inequality, poverty deepening across the globe. And then on the other hand, you have national budgets increasingly structured to support militarization. I think the figure in the statement is astonishing, that global military spending has reached a record $2.7 trillion. That is just incredible. And I think we can throw these stats around, but we can see how great that weight of expenditure is, while we see investments in health, education, social protection being slashed in most countries around the world. This isn't a budgetary issue. I think it's a reflection of whose lives are valued and whose are not. The wealth of the billionaire oligarchy rose 3 times faster in 2024 than in 2023. And Oxfam is now expecting 5 trillionaires to be created within a decade. All of this is while crises of the economy, climate, and conflict all mean the number of people living in poverty has barely changed since 1990. The growing concentration of wealth translates into a huge concentration of power in the hands of billionaires to shape economic decision-making in their favor. And this undermines democratic engagement and intensifies inequality further. As you say, Todd, inequality grounded in feminist and decolonial approaches. And we've seen how militarization not only diverts resources, but it entrenches injustice. Take Yemen. Oxfam's recent work there showed how militarized conflict, fueled by arms sales and geopolitical interests, has devastated lives. Over 18 million people in Yemen now need humanitarian assistance. Nearly half of the children under 5 there suffer from chronic malnutrition. And unfortunately, this is not an isolated case. It's a pattern we see in conflict zones around the world, including in Gaza, of course, including South Sudan, and many other places where militarization displaces essential services and deepens inequality. But I think the link between militarization and inequality isn't just about war. It's about how governments choose to spend all over the world. Oxfam's 2024 commitment to reducing inequality index found that 4 in 5 countries have cut spending on education, health, or social protection, and 9 in 10 have regressed on labor rights. These are political choices. They're choices that prioritize weapons over welfare. And we need to be clear, inequality itself is a driver of insecurity as well. When people are excluded from opportunity, when they're denied dignity, it breeds instability. True security really does not come from tanks or drones. It comes from justice, dignity, equality, and hope. Oxfam and our allies, some of whom I see on the call today, call out the colonial, patriarchal, and racist systems that underpin today's economic and political structures. Feminist economic models recognize care as a human right and a public good that's worth investing in. Decolonial thinking asks who benefits from militarization, whose bodies are sacrificed, and whose voices are silenced. We need to remember overwhelming military power enabled colonialism. In India, during the period of East India Company rule, military expenditure accounted for nearly 75% of expenses, and public works constituted only about 3%. And authorities didn't repair irrigation systems, impairing agricultural productivity and intensifying famines and droughts. The use of overwhelming force has continued all the way from the colonial times into the modern day in neocolonialism. It's estimated the US tried to change other countries' governments 72 times during the Cold War. They backed the US-backed coups in places like Guatemala, Chile. They repressed national autonomy, and they supported authoritarian regimes in the guise of stopping the spread of communism. And I think we can see these agendas being echoed today. Power is the central issue here. Militarization is not about defense. It's also about control. It's about maintaining systems of extraction and domination. And feminist and decolonial movements remind us the struggle against militarization is also a struggle for liberation, for bodily autonomy, for land, for voice, for dignity, and for life itself. So what do we do? As you're asking, Todd, it's really clear there is room to finance poverty reduction and reduce inequality if decision makers make different choices to redistribute power and transform systems. The joint statement clearly outlines how to do this, but I want to surface 4 priorities from our perspective. I think firstly, taxing the rich to end extreme wealth. Global tax policy needs to fall under a UN tax convention and facilitate the payment of higher taxes by the richest and corporations to radically reduce inequality, end extreme wealth, and break this billionaire oligarchy. Secondly, we need to cancel debt that traps countries in austerity. Countries in the global north should support the cancellation of all debt and play a constructive and fully committed role in dismantling the north's dominance of the global economy in all its forms. Thirdly, of course, countries should reduce military spending. They should stop arms sales to countries who use them to violate international law or human rights law, which we are not seeing happening right now. They should eliminate nuclear weapons, as I can call for, obviously, and we all call for, and undertake full nuclear disarmament. And by freeing up that money, we should redirect this resources from weapons and war and towards building systems of solidarity and care, tackling the climate crisis, building green energy, ending poverty and hunger, and investing in gender, social, and economic equality. And I think going back to what Susie was saying finally, I think all countries must absolutely support, all countries and all of us must absolutely support anti-racist movements of indigenous peoples and oppressed social groups and coalitions of feminists, LGBTQIA plus activists and human rights organizations that challenge imperialism, anti-rights actions and colonial legacies. We must reclaim this narrative. Militarization does not equal safety. Real safety comes from justice, equality, dignity, and solidarity, and governments must prioritize people over weapons. I think the joint statement today is a really powerful call for an alternative, and I hope it's a great stepping stone for the way forward. And just to be clear, inequality is a choice, militarization is a choice, but so is justice, so is peace, so is dignity, and so is hope. Thanks.